You're listening to the Valley Current.
Well, that's what happens when AOL resets everything on you, right?
Yes.
I mean, the thing that's amazing to me is that with all of this horsepower of computing, they don't give you a simple button that says, let me get some help, like instantaneous help. And then there would be some AI assistant or something that would come up and say, well, there's two different speaker systems on your Dell, and you're now reset. AOL reset everything on your computer is really what happened, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
that's what happened. So when they do that, I mean, this happens with a lot of devices, right? Because they're updating all the time.
Right.
And then, like my car is a Tesla, they update the Tesla and they move some of the controls, which is dangerous. They actually move some of the controls. I mean, I'm used to the controls being in a certain place. I get in the car and the car puts a thing on the screen that says your Tesla's updated. And I'm like, where's the button for being able to change the climate in the car? Or where's the button to turn on the camera, the rear camera? Like, they change some of the buttons. They don't even tell you what they're changing. You have to relearn the car. Like, there's some software guy that decided to rearrange things, right?
Right. Yeah. When I bought my car, I had a struggle finding simple things like resetting the clock.
Right.
It took, I think it took several days for me to find out where that button was.
I mean,
I do understand. So let's get down to business. How are you?
I'm good. You look good. You're very capable. I'll tell you, Wally could never have figured that out. If Wally got stuck, rest his soul, he would be stuck forever. I mean, he was really not as capable as you are with a computer.
Well, I understand a little bit about it, but certainly not as much as you do.
No, but you actually have patience and persistence, which is very rare, in my opinion, as you get older. I mean, I lose patience pretty rapidly with this stuff, and I've been doing it for the last 50, going on 60 years. If I think about when I got my first computer, I was a kid. I mean, back in those days, you had like a homemade thing. But, my parents never had a computer. My parents barely had cell phones, Len. You're way, way more advanced.
Neither did my parents.
I mean, just think about where we've come.
Well, I got onto computers when they first came out.
Right. It's an amplifier. It's a huge amplifier. It gives you a lot of capability.
Not only an amplifier, it's the memory capacity also that's important.
Right. But what you've done, which is amazing in many ways, and you would think someone would actually do a piece about this, is you've continued to use AOL. America Online, which was one of the very first email systems way back when.
Exactly. That's since I've been using it since then.
And you have found it to be sufficiently viable as an email system, because Gmail pretty much wiped out AOL, and to some degree is kind of the standard. Yeah. And having your name, which is famous, you have a famous name, Dr. Leonard Hayflick, Hayflick Limit, having your name at gmail.com will protect you against imposters that may decide to steal your identity, because everyone would think, well, if it's Dr. Leonard Hayflick at Gmail, it must be the real Dr. Leonard Hayflick at Gmail, because Gmail's become like the standard of how people operate.
The problem is I cannot get on to Gmail to send a Gmail email.
Oh, you'd have to get set up in a Gmail account. I mean,
I've been trying to, and I don't remember now what the problem is, but it's been a problem for years, which is why I've never I have a Gmail address, but I cannot use it because it's useless.
Oh, is it set to Dr. Leonard Hayflick or Leonard.Hayflick, or what is it set to?
Yeah, it's set to Leonard Hayflick at google.com.
Okay, which is the same, which is Gmail. Gmail, Google, they use that.
Yeah.
But you probably have it tied to an old cell phone number that sends a code to that old cell phone number, and you no longer have that cell phone number, right?
Well, that's a possibility. I can't remember whether I had an old. I never had a cell phone that took messages.
Yeah, because you still use a flip phone, right? You have an actual
a flip, yeah.
Although flip phone, which my mom used the flip phone too, but she didn't believe in smartphones, and she didn't want to pay the monthly fee for the smartphone. She was happy with the flip phone.
I'm with your mother.
Yeah, she was totally happy with what she had. She had a speed dial button to her butcher, and being able to speak. Len, we had a full-time nurse who was a chef. I think I told you this, from a French Haitian chef, Black woman, very, very smart. And my mom would look forward to her daily lunch custom made by this chef. And she would send, quote, her girl. She'd call the butcher. I think his name was Pete. She'd say, she knew him for decades. She'd say, Pete, I'm sending my girl. What do you have that's really good that we can have for lunch? And she would work up a menu. And she lived for that. She lived for that, Len. She lived for that meal, one meal a day. She lived for that.
That's a wonderful story.
It's so amazing. When she died, that nurse was really, really upset. She said, I had so much fun with your mom, and I brought out all of my culinary tricks, everything that I learned. She had a restaurant in Haiti that she gave up because of all the nutty gang stuff that goes on now in Haiti. I mean, that place is falling apart. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the moon and the sun.
Right, because you made a really big point about the total eclipse that happened this week that I think is spot on about the lack of scientific rigor in our newspapers, right?
Absolutely. That story that I sent to you and others is absolutely amazing and almost unbelievable. That the moon could sit at the place it does, producing the diameter it does, that absolutely perfectly matches that of the sun to permit a full eclipse. Otherwise, there would not be no such things as a full eclipse.
Right, and none of the stories in all the major newspapers picked up on that.
I'm sorry?
And none of the major newspapers picked up on the science part of that.
No.
Right?
And the astronomers cannot explain that. If the moon is moving away from the Earth at an inch to an inch and a half a year, and if the moon moves in many, many years, let's say a mile or two and further away, it might not work. We may never see eclipses anymore. It's that intricate.
Well, it is moving. It is moving, right?
Yes, it's moving about an inch and a half a year.
Right.
The full eclipse also allows something that could otherwise never be done, and that is the full eclipse permits for the first time to see the sun's corona.
Right.
Otherwise, you can't see the corona. It's impossible. And that's why astronomers wait for full eclipses in order to do what they can do during that time in respect to learning more about the corona, which is hotter than the sun itself.
So Len, let me play something for a second on the shared screen, because I want you to laugh at this. I want you to laugh at this because this is something that I thought of when you sent me the email that said, hey, there's something wrong with these news reports because they're not building in all of the applicable science. This is a scene from a show that unfortunately didn't get renewed. The show is called Loudermilk. And Loudermilk is a guy who is got many issues in his life. He lives in, I want to say, Seattle. But let me play this clip because he gives counseling to people that have alcohol problems. This guy Loudermilk gives counseling, and one of his students, patients, I don't know what you want to call a person who's getting alcohol anonymous treatments, group sessions, falls off the wagon and gets stopped in a DUI. So here's the scene. This scene is just priceless. Just let me make sure it's turned up so you can hear it.
Do you realize as I'm standing here, the earth is spinning on its axis 1,000 miles an hour? Like Father's God spinning a basketball 1,000 miles an hour. And at the same time it's doing that, the earth is going in orbit around the sun. And guess what rate of speed? 66,000 miles an hour. 66,000 miles an hour, 1,000 miles an hour. And on top of that, the whole solar system's going through the Milky Way galaxy. And guess what rate of speed? 400,000 miles an hour, 400,000 miles an hour, 66,000 miles an hour, and 1,000 miles an hour. And to top it all off, as that's happening, the whole Milky Way galaxy is tearing through the universe. And guess what rate of speed? 2.2 million miles an hour. And that, officer, is why I failed to walk a straight line, as you requested a few moments ago.
Wasn't that good? I mean, to me, they really worked on that 45-second scene to explain, in a way, some of the science that you were noting is sort of lacking from basic news report. And Loudermilk, which is kind of a comedy about people that are in Alcoholics Anonymous and how they deal with their lives. It was actually a great show. I found it quite entertaining, but it didn't get renewed. But that guy is one of the patients or one of the participants in the group sessions that happened. And he decided to start drinking again for some reason. He got stopped by a cop. He got driving under the influence. And he tried to use that. And it's gone on the internet as a way to argue that maybe you can get out of a drunk driving ticket by explaining. You have to remember all those numbers, right? It was very persuasive too, right?
They're all totally wrong. Amazing. Just amazing.
So you, Len, are actually an expert in critical thinking. That's really what you are. You really are.
I try to be, because there are many examples. For example, another one that just boggles the mind is when the major news organizations tell us how many they say Palestinians died in Gaza. It's down to something like 33,000 or something like that.
Right.
But first of all, Hamas is giving us that information. Hamas is, in the United States and many other countries, is called a
terrorist
organization.
Right.
On the one hand, we have called it an official terrorist organization. And on the other hand, the major news organizations believe what's coming out of the mouths of a terrorist organization.
Right.
Secondly, they don't break down the figures. They say Palestinians, but that includes all of the people who the Israelis killed as Hamas soldiers, which number in the tens of thousands of people. You cannot count all the dead soldiers that Israelis killed in a summary of the total number of Palestinians killed. It's because they want you to believe that these are all civilians.
Right.
They're not all civilians. Furthermore, there are the normal number of people who died daily out of 2 million residents in Gaza.
Right.
And secondly, there are many, many people who are not
Muslim. They're
not Muslims.
Yeah.
Well, the breakdown goes on and on.
Right.
And so the number, I mean, it's bad that anybody is killed, of course. But for the major news organizations to state those figures without qualification, which happens constantly, is a terrible, terrible thing for them to do.
Right. And
they're continuing the propaganda being spread by a terrorist organization. It doesn't help anybody.
Len, I'm interested in knowing when did you realize that you were an expert critical thinker? It must have happened when you were in grade school, right? It must have happened.
Well, I don't know, because I never knew of the concept. I ended up, I think I told you, on the high school debating team.
Okay.
And that taught me a lot, because we debated key issues of the day and took both sides. In a debate, you have to take both sides.
Right.
And that taught me a lot. I was accompanied by two of my schoolmates, one of whom was damn near genius. They're both dead now, but they were very clever guys, brilliant as hell. And they could figure things out without getting that done for them by a newspaper or by the radio. There are many other things that have been questioned that nobody questions. It's absolutely amazing to me.
But it sounds like high school was formative for you in Pennsylvania, right?
To a large extent, it was. And then when even today, I'm trying to think, there's so many other things. For example, PBS makes so many mistakes. So many mistakes. It's unbelievable. Yet there is no way of notifying them of the mistakes that they've made, although they must know about it.
Right.
All of their material is taped.
Right.
But it makes, I can't think of all of them, but it drives me crazy every time I hear a newscast from PBS. The mistakes that they make historically and otherwise are absolutely crazy.
So
and there's no way to tell them that.
Right. You're identifying a failure in what might be called the news reporting system.
Yes.
Which is, there should be, and I guess you'd say perhaps the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, they have a way for you to comment on electronic bulletin boards, right? You could provide comments, but the comments get drowned out often by a lot of opinion and argument that occurs. That's the problem. Once you open the door to commentary, you often get a lot of vitriol from people. Right?
I should write all their errors down, but I just don't have the motivation to do it. But it's just.
But your mind is always very actively engaged. What I've observed, you're very actively engaged in seeing the defect in the reasoning or the presentation that's being given. Right.
I like to point out mistakes, which is one of the reasons why I was a successful scientist.
Right.
To show the mistakes.
Right. So that must have been ingrained in you pretty early and then really refined over time, right?
You may be right. I'm not sure, but you may be right, yes.
because that's the worry. The worry that I have in many ways, and I see this, is children are not being educated as critical thinkers. They're not, it's almost not politically correct to point out an error because somehow someone's going to feel offended that, oh, you pointed out that I made a mistake. And that's really makes me feel bad. Like it's a snowflake approach to life.
Well, I think a lot of it has its origin in religion, though. Any religion, all religions.
Right.
I believe that teaching of what I call fairy tales is the source of a lot of the problems that I think people have.
Right.
For example, I remember some of the great statements made during the monkey trial.
Yeah, I remember.
When that great orator who was defending the teacher said, when the other side brought up some points that were made in the Bible, believing them to be accurate and true, they were talking about Noah's Ark.
Right.
And this great orator for the opposing side said, "What happened to the fish?"
Right. The case that you're bringing up, just to be clear, is the Scopes monkey trial from 1925.
You're absolutely right on.
That's the case. And the beauty of the internet is I can quickly, and I'll do this because I think it's important because it does get into this question of, are we failing to do stuff we should be doing to enhance critical thinking? Yeah. And maybe it does trace to religion. So let me just play this for a second because I think it ties right in.
It amazes me how fast you do those things.
John Scopes, a young teacher of Tennessee, had taught, contrary to state law, Darwin's theory of evolution. The Tennessee country people believed this was contrary to biblical doctrine. And Scopes' trial got worldwide publicity, with the Tennessee fundamentalists lined up against the liberals and intellectuals of America. William Jennings Bryan, old and full of oratory, defended the beliefs of the fundamentalists. He was aided by the prosecuting zeal of old Judge Ben McKenzie, a local politician influential in the area, who helped to make the trial an inquisition. The courtroom was packed as the case reached a climax. Arthur Garfield Hayes, defending Scopes, explained Darwin's theory of evolution. And Dudley Field Malone, another liberal, added his plea for tolerance to the cause of freedom of thought. Then the defense threw in another artful veteran, Clarence Darrow, for what turned out to be the cross-examination of Bryan. Darrow, in a shirt-sleeves analysis, reduced the elder statesman's antiquated ideas to intellectual rubble.
After the closing remarks, Judge Ralston charged the jury, and they retired for their deliberations on a verdict. On the day of the announced decision, the two opposing sides waited calmly in the courtroom. The jury foreman, Captain Jack Thompson, delivered the verdict of guilty as charged. John Scopes received the decree of his $100 fine without any outward show of bitterness. 2 years later, the decision was to be reversed in the Appellate Court of Appeals. William Jennings Bryan died 5 days after the end of the famous trial. Although victorious in the courtroom, he and the fundamentalist cause had been destroyed. The encounter in Dayton, Tennessee, had solved the basic struggle of thinking and education in the modern day.
That might be a bit of an overstatement because we have the very same problem, you could argue, playing out today in the state system, where there's all these rigid state laws that mandate and eliminate certain areas from educational coverage, right?
America puts...
It also allows and does make millions and millions of people believe things without evidence.
Right.
There is no evidence for what is written in the Bible other than the statement that God guided the hands of the writers, that God guided that hand, and so the Bible was written by God. But if you look at the history of the Bible, you find that it's a very checkered history of sections that were written at the time that were discarded, and others that some people didn't like that were included. So it's a checkerboard of introductions into the Bible of things that politically were put there or removed from there.
Right.
So it's hard to believe such a thing.
Right.
The other serious problem that I have, and I'll be quite frank about it, because I think it is true, although I have no evidence either, but I think we can all agree that of the three major religions today, Judaism appears to be the oldest and the first in which the people began to believe in one God. Prior to that, there was the belief that there were God for this, God for that, and God for another thing.
Right.
But I believe the Jews, they were taught to worship a golden calf, I believe.
Right.
And they then evolved to believing in one God. And then came along the Christians, and Christ, of course, was a Jew. He was born a Jew. He spent his life as a Jew. He didn't know any other religion, despite some of the things that he did that were either good or bad, depending on what you want to believe. But anyhow, so, but then Christ came along at year one or year zero, whatever you want to, I guess it was year zero.
Yep.
And but he was not written about until 600 years later.
Right. How can that be possibly accurate?
How is that possible? How could you and I write a story today that every people would believe about some history that took place 600 years ago, even with our access to libraries and other sources of information, none of which people had then? So that worries me a lot. And then, of course, in the year 700 came the Muslims. And both of the religions have aspects that are common to Judaism. Muslims don't even understand that. For example, they are forbidden to eat meat.
Okay.
That they're not allowed to eat a certain kind of meat, and neither do religious Jews. And there is also the belief in one God. The whole argument is that we are much closer in our religious beliefs, if we want to believe those religions. We're much closer in respect to how we worship than most people believe, as in the case of Muslims and Jews. Put a breach in their understanding of each other that's difficult really to understand because of so many similarities. And the same thing is true of Catholicism.
Yeah.
Catholicism and Judaism and Protestantism, they all have so many things in common. It's amazing.
So, Len, you'll get a kick out of what I'm going to put in the chat, and I'll just summarize it because it's an interesting thing that I did while you were asking the question of what is it that Muslims are prohibited from eating, and basically I'll put this on the screen. The ChatGPT says pork and pork byproducts are strictly prohibited in Islam. This is explicitly mentioned in the Quran. Of course, that's also true, right, for Jews. Right?
Absolutely.
And the second thing, which I never heard, is Muslims are not allowed to eat meat from any animal that dies of itself without being slaughtered in an Islamic way. So
well, that's close to Judaism too, because an animal to be eaten and slaughtered by what is called a shochet must be killed only by slitting the throat.
Right.
And the reason for that was the belief that that was the least painful way of killing an animal.
Right. The third area is it's the consumption of blood in any form is forbidden, including any dish, any culinary dish where blood is used as an ingredient. I guess there are some dishes.
That's true of Judaism too, which is why all meat is treated with salt, which is allegedly removes all the blood, but it's actually not removing blood. It's removing myoglobin, which is completely different than blood.
Right.
When the meat is salted, it's myoglobin that's coming out.
Then the fourth is animals slaughtered in the name of someone other than Allah. So that's a little bit like a full-time job then for someone to be kind of licensed to do slaughtering, right? It's like a licensing system, right?
Yeah.
And
well, I'm glad to know that you agree with a lot of this stuff.
Well, it's not that I agree or disagree. It's more that it's interesting how these religions do have similarities. I mean, in Catholicism, it used to be Fridays were fasting. You were supposed to fast. Then they changed it to Fridays are for fish and not meat. And then they changed it yet again. Like they kept changing it over time. And it certainly made the fishmongers upset when they changed it because they had their Fridays. I mean, they were delivering 1/7 of the consumption of protein to their customers, and that changed. So then the other three are predatory animals with fangs, such as lions, tigers, and wolves. I mean, I don't know who eats those animals, but maybe someone does. Birds of prey with talons are prohibited, such as eagles and hawks. And then it says land animals without external ears. I've never heard that before. Snakes, lizards, anything that doesn't have external ears are prohibited as well.
Well, anyhow, it's all very interesting in one way and sad in other ways.
Right. So when you think about kind of religion, do you think of it as having corrupted critical thinking? Like, do you think of it as it's actually corrupted the enhancement of critical thinking? Because I do think critical thinking is on the decline. I'm not sure religion is.
Yes, I do. I've had, as you know, several debates with some of these people, and it's just impossible to argue with them because they always take refuge in the Word of God.
Right.
Who am I to disagree with the Word of God?
Right.
It's just impossible to argue properly. But yes, I think that religion, and there is actually today, the evangelists are the ones who are all supporting Trump.
Right.
And that's a terrible thing to think about. Why are they doing that? He has somehow captured all of these evangelists who are all Bible thumpers.
Well, he's certainly trying to play to that audience, but there's a big issue about can he play to that audience and still carry the female vote? Because most women believe there's a right to choose, and most men believe there's a right to choose, and even most Republicans.
Yes.
General Republican Party believe there's a right to choose. And, they may say outwardly that they don't believe in it, but the reality is he's bucking that trend, and he's trying to do it gingerly because he knows he's going to lose a lot of votes. And it's a big issue. It's a hot issue because he did appoint 3 justices who did, through the Dobbs decision, reverse Roe versus Wade. And that decision stayed as good law for many, many decades.
But with everything, the whole big package of lies that he has told over the years, thousands and thousands of lies that have been proven to be lies. How is it possible for any person with more than 2 neurons in their brain to want to vote for someone who is a chronic and congenital liar? I don't understand that. Yet 70 million people voted for this. It's just impossible for me to get my brain around why even one person would vote for him. It's just impossible to understand for me. I cannot imagine how anyone would vote for him in this next election. It just boggles my mind.
Well, I'll give you my view on it, and we can debate this discussion later. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I think there is a view among many Americans that the biggest issue facing America is the international strongmen, such as Putin and others, who are taking more and more control in international politics. And if we don't have a strongman really capable of facing up to that individual, whoever that might be, it might be Xi in China, it might be Putin in Russia, it might be any number of strongmen that are out there, that if we don't have the equivalent powerful fighter in our camp, we are going to be destroyed by an international enemy. And if you look at, there's a great series playing right now called Turning Point. It's on Netflix. It's really well done. It's many episodes of how did the Cold War get created? How did that happen? And it goes through in a lot of detail how Truman decided to press the button that put 2 nuclear warheads in the destruction of 2 cities, or most of 2 cities in Japan. And how did he decide that? And it reveals some stuff I never knew, Len, maybe you did, that Truman wanted to prevent Russia from getting a piece of Japan. So he wanted to end the war before the Russians did a land invasion, which they were planning to do. They were planning to enter from the east, from Manchuria and Mongolia. Yeah. And they had all their troops lined up, and he did not want the division of Germany, the way it was divided between the Russians and the United States, to happen in Japan. I didn't know that. And they have some proof for this. And so it was essentially motivated by, he just wanted to make sure he trumped the Russians. He didn't really want to, he wanted to end the war, but it was really about, I got to end it in my style so that the Russians don't get control of that country, because they're never going to leave. Once they get control, they're never going to leave. And you could say that's a bit altruistic, but man, to kill that many people along the way, it's really a tragic choice if you think about it.
Yeah, well, your strongman argument is, of course, logical and understandable, but I don't think that the evangelicals and many, many other Republicans think that way. Surely there must be some, but they haven't got the critical mind sufficient enough to make the argument that you just made about strongmen. That's why I have difficulty understanding theories like that.
Well, they like the idea.
They've never said it publicly. Well, I'm sure a couple have, but not in stupendous numbers. The Trumpers have not said the reason we're a Trumper is because we're worried about Putin and Xi and others. I've never heard that. But
Right.
again, I'm sure you're right in respect to some of them. It's hard for me to believe that it's right for 50, 60, or 70 millions of them.
Right. It might be more just tied to the view that they don't care for the liberal, what they view as a super liberal approach that is kind of agnostic to religion, right? It's just totally agnostic to religion.
Yeah, right.
But your point is, look, we're 100 years after the Scopes trial. Basically, 1925 was when that Scopes trial happened. And we're 100 years later, and we're still as divided. We're still, as a nation, as divided as 100 years ago. And probably some people would say, well, you can go 100 years from that backwards, and we're still as divided from 1825. And still as divided from then.
Yes, yes.
And the interesting footnote in all this is maybe the thing that has to happen that will actually bring us all together as a country and maybe even as a world is some invasion from outer space where there's a common enemy for everyone.
Well, it's an interesting thought. But I don't know that you and I are going to live long enough to see.
Well, I think if anyone does, it'll be you, because you're going to make it beyond your mom. You're going to make it beyond 107. And that's what, about 12 years from now?
12 years, yes.
12 years from now, you'll be 107. So I hope that happens, Len, because you're taking care of yourself. And we'll continue to have these dialogues together, and we'll see. There's a good film or series of episodes called The Three Body Problem on either Netflix or Apple TV or somewhere, Paramount maybe, Peacock maybe, or Apple TV. I'll send you these links, and we'll have a further discussion.
Okay, Jack.
Take care. You look great. I'm going to send you a table that compares Judaism to Muslims on food. I just generated. I'm going to send it to you by email.
Well, you're looking good as well, but even more intellectually, you are in perfect condition.
All right, thanks.
Please give my regards to Lee.
I will. You take care.
Remember to try to come see me here when you and Lee visit.
Yeah, we'll probably be in town in June. We're going to Japan in May.
Oh, really?
We'll probably come back through Honolulu and then from Hawaii into the Bay Area.
Okay, well, keep me informed. Have you been to Japan before?
I've been there very briefly, and it was a long time ago, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I just gave my granddaughter advice, and I might mention a couple of things to you that you may not know about that are very important for you to know.
Okay.
First of all, if you arrive at there are two airports in Tokyo.
Right.
Haneda is the smaller one, but the big major one, if you arrive there, you need and are on your way to Tokyo, you need to take the fast train and not the bus.
Right.
There is an alternative. The train is far more comfortable. Of course, it costs a little more, but let's not talk about money.
Right. Right.
You must take the train from the airport to Tokyo station. The second thing you need to understand is that you will have luggage.
Yeah.
When Ruth and I boarded the bullet trains, we were the only ones with luggage struggling to get it onto the damn train.
Right.
Nobody else, no other Japanese person on the train had luggage other than a little bag they had that was a foot in diameter and held light items. We discovered that there is a wonderful service that you must take advantage of. And that service, there are two of them. The one that may be more common is called the Black Cat.
Yeah.
It is a service. Do you know about it?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah, I've heard of it. I've not used it.
You must use it because you're going to have heavy luggage. Don't want to schlep luggage around.
Right.
What you do is you pack your luggage the night before you leave the hotel, and you have them take it down to the registration desk, where they will contact Black Cat, who will come immediately pick it up, and they will guarantee that it will arrive at your next hotel before you arrive there.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, it's amazing.
It is amazing. They do it on tricycles mostly.
Tricycles?
And
I didn't know that.
train. And also on trains when they're far enough apart.
Right.
But it never fails. The system does not fail. You must remember to do that.
Okay, well, that's good.
Save you and Lee a lot of trouble with luggage. The next thing that you need to know is that it's difficult to, unless you have somebody with you who speaks Japanese, will you?
No.
Well, you need to either book in advance, although you can do it with more difficulty when you're in Tokyo. You should book in advance tours led by English-speaking people.
Right.
Otherwise, it's virtually impossible for you to get around.
Yeah.
The language barrier is one hell of a barrier. And that will assist you in getting to places you would never see before and make it much, much easier. The cost is not relevant. Right. It's reasonable.
Right.
The other thing that you need to know is getting food.
Yeah.
You must go to one or more of the major department stores in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. One of them is actually in Tokyo Station. And you must go to the basement food department, which is a city block on all four sides.
Wow.
And it's filled with kiosks showing their different foods. And it's amazing. You can pick whatever you want and take it back to your hotel to eat it, because that will give you the kind of opportunity to see what you're going to be getting, which you can't do in a restaurant, before you and take it back to your room, and you can eat it there. It's usually cold stuff,
right?
But there are some hot stuffs too.
Yeah.
But anyhow, getting food is difficult. The other thing you need to remember is that in the major hotels, there is always a restaurant.
Yeah.
In which some of the wait people speak English, but more importantly, as you enter the restaurant, they show a big window that has in plastic bottles of the food.
Right.
You can call the waitress out and say, I want that guy, and I want that guy, and I want that guy.
Right.
And they will understand. What other advice? Well, you really should ride the bullet train.
No, for sure. For sure.
First class. And you can get a meal on board if the trip is long enough, but you need help. You need help from somebody, usually the hotel concierge, to arrange for your tickets.
You've been to Japan pretty often, right? Haven't you?
I've been there many more times than I can count. I've taught there for 1 month and 3 consecutive years.
Wow.
So
nice.
I know Japan very well. There are other things. I'm trying to think of things that are critical for you to do, but I already gave you several.
No, we'll do another discussion about it, and I'll get Lee to join because she's got lots of questions, and picking your brain about that would be a really enjoyable thing. So let's plan on it.
I'd be happy to do it, and believe me, it'll be worth your while.
Absolutely. I know it would be worthwhile. Thanks, Len. You have a good evening. Take care.
Okay, you too.
All right, of course.
Good to you as usual. Take care.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.